At 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 1st of November 1944, the fighters of the 47th Sentai lifted off from Narimasu Airfield outside Tokyo and climbed toward a single American aircraft. The aircraft was unarmed. It carried cameras instead of bombs. It was not evading them, not diving, not turning, just crossing the capital at 32,000 feet, unhurried, taking photographs. The Nakajima Ki-44 was one of the fastest climbing fighters Japan had built. Its pilots were experienced. They closed to within 3,000 feet, and then the air ran out beneath them. Above them, an American navigator was watching his ground speed collapse toward 70 miles an hour in a wind that neither Air Force knew existed. Both sides went home that day with the same problem and no language for it. Japan's commanders could see exactly why they were failing. Not one of them could say it out loud. The aircraft was an F-13, a superfortress with the bomb bays emptied and cameras fitted in their place. Its commander was Captain Ralph Stakely of the 3rd Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron, flying from Saipan. He was over Japan for roughly half an hour. He came home after 14 hours with 7,000 photographs. That was the whole raid folder. Every aiming point, every engine plant, every densely packed residential district that would burn 4 months later, photographed in clear weather, unopposed, over the capital of a country still at war. Anti-aircraft batteries fired and fell short too. The 10th Air Division, under Major General Kihachiro Yoshida, was responsible for the skies over the Kanto Plain. Its pilots did everything the manual asked. They climbed on full power until the controls went soft in their hands, breathing bottled oxygen in unheated cockpits, watching the last 3,000 feet refuse to close. The pilots knew exactly what that number meant. The number wasn't the problem. Fixing it was supposed to be somebody's job. The difficulty was that it was several people's jobs, inside institutions that didn't share drawings. Japan fought the air war with 2 air forces. The Army and the Navy ran separate procurement, separate specifications, separate engine programs, and separate factories. Nakajima and Mitsubishi, the 2 industrial giants, competed for both, and the largest single node in that system sat in the western suburbs of Tokyo. The Nakajima works at Musashino, the most important aero engine plant in the country. On the 11th of November 1944, the 20th Air Force issued its first target directive to 21st Bomber Command. Japanese aircraft and aero engine factories were named first. The plant that built the engines meant to reach the bombers was the bombers' first target. The answer already existed on paper. It had existed since 1942. The Navy had seen this coming before almost anyone. In September 1939, it issued the 14 Shu specification, a pure local defense interceptor built to climb fast and hit hard against high-flying bombers with armor behind the pilot's seat and maneuverability explicitly sacrificed to get it. Mitsubishi was the only firm that answered. The work went to Jiro Horikoshi. Horikoshi had made his name on the opposite philosophy. The A6M, the Zero, was a masterpiece of subtraction. A fighter built light enough to outturn and outrange everything in the Pacific. Now he was being asked to build the reverse, around an engine he hadn't chosen. The big Keisai radial, buried behind a long cowling, driving the propeller through an extension shaft, cooled by a forced draft fan because no natural airflow could reach it. The J2M Raiden first flew in March 1942. It shook. It overheated. It broke undercarriages. A test pilot, Lieutenant Takumi Hawashi, was killed, and the drawings went back to the board and came out again, and went back. He had solved the wrong half of the problem. The half that mattered was upstream, in the foundries. By November 1944, the Army had stopped waiting for a new aircraft and started modifying the one it had. Inside the 47th Sentai at Narimasu and inside the 244th and the 53rd, small units were formed under the name Shinten Sekutai. 4 aircraft each at first, later as many as 8 per air defense regiment. The aircraft were stripped, guns removed, armor plate removed, radio removed, every fitting not required to fly taken out and left on the concrete. They were filing the knife down until nothing was left but the point. If this is the kind of history you want more of, a like and a subscribe help keep the research going. Stay with it, because Japan's own test data, sitting in a program file, already contradicted the story its commanders were telling the public. Some Ki-44s kept a weapon. The Ki-44 Mark II, Otsu could carry the 40mm Ho 301 in the wings, a cannon firing caseless ammunition at low velocity over a very short range. It was lethal, and it was useful at a distance measured in a few hundred meters. Against bombers holding 30,000 feet, that distance was almost indistinguishable from collision. So the doctrine was written down: fire what you have, then ram, then get out. The men selected were the skilled ones, precisely because the order was not to die. They were expected to strike the bomber, bail out, and fly again the next day. It wasn't framed as suicide. It was framed as the only remaining way to convert a fighter's weight into damage. On the 24th of November 1944, Corporal Yoshio Mita rammed a B-29 named Lucky Irish. On the 27th of January 1945, Master Sergeant Isamu Sakamoto rammed another, was thrown clear of his cockpit, survived, and was decorated with the Bukosho. Every kilogram removed to reach the bomber removed the reason for being there. That trade-off deserves to be understood clearly rather than mocked. Given the engines available, given the fuel available, given the metallurgy available, stripping the airframe wasn't stupidity. It was the only lever left inside the cockpit. Every other lever was 300 miles away in furnaces that couldn't do what was being asked of them, because the correct answer had already been drawn. Nakajima and the Army's Technical Division had begun serious work on exhaust-driven turbo-superchargers for large radial engines in 1942, 2 years before a single B-29 appeared over the home islands. The Navy pushed the same idea onto Horikoshi's interceptor. The J2M carried a turbo behind the cockpit, and the numbers were unambiguous. The altitude at which the engine held its rated power doubled, from roughly 15,700 feet to just over 30,000 feet, exactly where the bombers were. 2 prototypes were built. The turbo was never made reliable. Nakajima's dedicated high-altitude fighter, the Ki-87, first flew in April 1945 and completed 5 flights, all of them with the undercarriage locked down because the retraction system wasn't finished. 500 had been ordered. 1 existed. Tachikawa's Ki-94-2 never flew at all. The paperwork was correct. The furnaces were not. None of that was visible from the ground in the winter of 1944. What was visible was that the interceptors were getting through. On the 3rd of December, Major Teruhiko Kobayashi, at 24, the youngest regimental commander in the Army Air Force, shot down his first B-29 over Tokyo. His unit, the 244th, based at Chofu, claimed 6 bombers on that single sortie. Across the war, the 244th claimed 73. The claims were high. Post-war reconstruction suggests both sides overcounted by roughly a factor of 3, American gunners as badly as Japanese pilots. But nobody in 1944 had the post-war reconstruction. They had the tally boards. And the American numbers looked worse. Between November 1944 and February 1945, 21st Bomber Command flew 2,148 sorties and dropped 5,398 tons on Japanese aircraft plants. Damage to those plants ran at 4 to 6%. On the 20th of January, Brigadier General Haywood Hansell, precision bombing's most articulate advocate, was relieved of command. Both sides read the same 6 months as proof they were right. Japan concluded that interception worked. America concluded that precision bombing didn't. The war hadn't turned. It was about to, and not in the direction either side was watching. The turn came in 5 stages, and only the last of them was fought in the air. The first stage was industrial. Japan entered the war burning 87 and 91 octane aviation fuel, and by 1945 it was still burning it, while the blockade closed and the refineries starved. Nakajima's Homari engine had been designed around better fuel than the country could supply. Skilled machinists had been conscripted and replaced by students and drafted labor. Rated horsepower and delivered horsepower drifted apart, quietly, on every production line. The second stage was attritional. A stripped fighter is a single-use asset. A pilot who rams may survive, and several did, but the aircraft doesn't, and neither does the tactic, repeated across hundreds of sorties by men who were increasingly not the veterans the doctrine assumed. The third stage was intelligence, and it's the stage where Japanese command came closest to being right. On the night of the 3rd of March, 1945, Japanese listening posts intercepted American radio traffic indicating a large-scale night-flying exercise. The conclusion was correct. The Americans were preparing to bomb at night. The 10th Air Division had already been pushing night training, and the 53rd Sentai had been converted into a specialist night fighter unit. What nobody predicted was the altitude. The fourth stage was tactical. On the night of March 9th, Curtis LeMay sent 334 superfortresses toward Tokyo with guns, gunners, and ammunition stripped out except for the tail position, the same arithmetic the Shinton pilots had run, in reverse, with far more to gain by it. 279 of them bombed from between 5,000 and 9,000 feet with 1,665 tons of incendiaries. American assessments had already concluded that Tokyo's heavy anti-aircraft belt was cited to be most effective against aircraft at 30,000 feet and 300 miles per hour. The guns were aimed at the wrong sky. 14 bombers and 96 airmen were lost. On the ground, estimates of the dead begin at 80,000 and run past 100,000 in one night. The fifth stage was terminal. Iwo Jima fell, and from April the P-51s escorted the bombers all the way in. On June 15th, 444 B-29s attacked Osaka, and not one Japanese fighter rose to meet them. What remained was being hoarded for an invasion that never came. The knife had been filed to a point. The bombers came in underneath it. What happened afterwards happened quickly, and most of it happened to institutions rather than to people. Nakajima Aircraft, the largest aircraft manufacturer in Japan, builder of the engines the B-29s came to destroy, renamed itself Fuji Sangyo before the Americans even arrived. On the 6th of November 1945, occupation authorities broke it up. Aircraft work was prohibited outright. By 1950, the remains had been divided into 12 companies, most of them run by former Nakajima men. 5 of them recombined in 1953 as Fuji Heavy Industries. In 2017, Fuji Heavy Industries renamed itself Subaru. In 1946, one of those fragments put a small scooter into production called the Rabbit. Its wheel hubs were made on the Jig that had produced tail wheels for wartime bombers because the Jig had survived and new tooling hadn't. An engineering culture that had spent a decade being told to make everything lighter went looking for something else to make light. The Musashino complex itself, the plant named first on the American target list, was seized by the U.S. Army, remodeled into housing and storage, and in 1951, part of the cleared ground was turned into a baseball diamond. Mitsubishi, spread across ships and heavy machinery, survived intact under its own name. Horikoshi wrote his memoir. It was translated decades later, and it sits on English-language shelves now, the record of a man who spent a war being handed engines he hadn't chosen. Teruhiko Kobayashi survived. In September 1954, he joined the new Japan Air Self-Defense Force, trained on jets in the United States, and on the 4th of June 1957 was killed with another pilot when their T-33 crashed on takeoff from Hamamatsu. 13 years after he rammed a bomber he could barely reach. Wasaburō Ōishi died on the 18th of December 1950. Between 1923 and 1925, from the Aerological Observatory at Tatano, Ōishi released roughly 1,300 pilot balloons and tracked them into the upper air. He found a river of wind moving over Japan at speeds nobody had recorded. He published it in 1926, then in 18 further reports across 19 years, 1,246 pages, all of them written in Esperanto, because he believed a neutral language would carry Japanese science to the world. Almost nobody read them. American crews met that wind for the first time in November 1944 and had no name for it. It scattered their bombs, broke their precision doctrine, and pushed their commanders down toward the fire raids. The jet stream was only formally traced back to Ōishi's observatory reports in a paper published in 2003. So the knife was filed down to a point that was never going to reach, and the wind that settled the argument had been measured, published, and shelved 20 years before the first superfortress flew. Around the edges of Chofu Airport in an ordinary Tokyo residential street, concrete aircraft shelters are still standing. They were built in 1944 by mobilized school children and prisoners from Fuchu prison to protect Ki-61 fighters from bombers those fighters couldn't reach. Somebody has planted a tree beside one of them and called it a tree of peace. Overhead, airliners still route around the wind, Ōishi wrote down in a language nobody read. On the roads below, cars built by what's left of Nakajima. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon outside Tokyo, fighters once climbed toward a single American aircraft and stopped 3,000 feet short. If you have a view on that trade-off, whether stripping those fighters was courage or an admission nobody was permitted to make, leave it in the comments, and a like and a subscribe help keep this research going. The shelters are still there. They were built at ground level for aircraft that could never get high enough.